Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the web television series Cobra Kai. I will issue a spoiler alert here for the first 2 seasons of Cobra Kai and all of the Karate Kid movies. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So I'll start with a summary of the series, I'll move to the mental health and personality factors, and then I'll provide my analysis about the series in general. Cobra Kai is a series that was based on the Karate Kid movies, with a lot of emphasis on the events that took place toward the end of the first film, The Karate Kid. This movie included the famous All-Valley Tournament fight scene that took place in 1984 between the characters Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence. LaRusso achieved victory in the final match by kicking Lawrence in the head. The series returns to California and details the adventures of LaRusso and Lawrence starting in 2018, so both characters are supposed to be in their 50s. LaRusso owns a number of car dealerships in the San Fernando Valley and is quite wealthy. He has capitalized on his fame as the All-Valley Karate Champion. He lives in Encino. He is married to Amanda and has a daughter and a son. Only the daughter is a major character. Her name is Samantha. Lawrence lives in an apartment in Reseda and works as a handyman. He struggles with his intake of alcohol and apparently has not kept up with technological advances that occurred over the last 34 years. This is a running joke used throughout the series, like when Lawrence refers to hashtags as hash browns. Lawrence has a son named Robbie. Their relationship is contentious. Lawrence decides to start a martial arts training center referred to as a dojo. He calls it Cobra Kai, which is the dojo he was part of when he was young and lost to LaRusso. The philosophy of the dojo is strike first, strike hard, and no mercy. The rivalry between LaRusso and Lawrence is reactivated after a series of events brings them into contact again. LaRusso is mortified that the Cobra Kai philosophy is returning to the area, so he starts his own dojo based on the philosophy of Mr. Miyagi, who was the sensei that helped him win the tournament in 1984. LaRusso's dojo is called Miyagi-Do, and his philosophy is essentially based on balance. Throughout the series, we see the rivalry between LaRusso and Lawrence play out on several levels. We see the personal level. They don't like each other, then they do, then they don't again, they kind of go back and forth. We see a relational level. For example, Robbie, Lawrence's son, is romantically involved with Samantha, LaRusso's daughter. We also see the rivalry at the dojo level, Cobra Kai versus Miyagi-Do. Other key characters include Miguel, who is Lawrence's best student, and John Kreese, who was the original Cobra Kai sensei that taught Lawrence in 1984. Season 2 ends with Miguel being seriously injured during a massive fight at school. His fate is unknown. Lawrence walked away from Cobra Kai as John Kreese somehow worked out a deal with the landlord of the dojo and just took over. Like it would be that simple, but I guess they really just needed that plot device to somehow work, so they kind of forced it in the series. Everyone's romantic relationships are in trouble except for LaRusso and Amanda. They recently patched things up after going through a rough spot. So now looking at the mental health and personality factors. From a mental health perspective, other than possible substance use disorder for Lawrence, nothing is really evident in the series. I'll take a look at the personalities of the 2 main characters, LaRusso and Lawrence. LaRusso, in my opinion, is an unlikable character, moralistic, lost, bored, hypervigilant, and smug. He wants to impose his philosophy of balance on the youth of the community. He believes he knows what's right for them. He knows what's best for everyone. He has contempt for Lawrence, but like I said before, then he likes him in other moments. He can't really quite solidify his opinion. He has a high level of openness to experience. There's an appreciation for aesthetics, and he is creative. He is mostly conscientious, hardworking, careful, but we also see some impulsivity. He tends to be extroverted. He's outgoing, friendly, somewhat assertive, and somewhat sensation-seeking. As far as agreeableness, I think his level is high. LaRusso is generally trusting, altruistic, empathic, and straightforward, but we also see a more antagonistic side come out, especially around Lawrence. Also, LaRusso is not modest. As far as neuroticism, his level is mid-range. he can be somewhat emotionally reactive, but is typically not out of control. LaRusso is not animated. The character feels dull, stale, predictable. It's hard to really get invested in what he's doing. I think if part of it is Ralph Macchio's acting, it's like something is missing. I don't think he's a bad actor overall. He was pretty good in My Cousin Vinny, but he really didn't do a great job in this series. Now looking at Johnny Lawrence, this character is portrayed quite differently. A pathetic, reckless, aimless, and fearlessly dominant person who is caught in the past, almost like he cannot prove himself enough to overcome the defeat at the All Valley tournament. He continually seeks to prove his worth. He also promotes a philosophy to the youth of the community, the Cobra Kai philosophy that I mentioned. The character is low in openness to experience. He's not really creative. He has no appreciation for abstract theory. He isn't intellectually curious. For example, his knowledge of technology is quite limited, as I mentioned. We see that his conscientiousness is low. He's disorganized. He has a terrible work ethic. He's impulsive, irresponsible, and does not pay his bills on time. The facets for extroversion are really split, with most of the levels being low. He is not particularly outgoing and friendly. We see few positive emotions, although he is assertive and sensation-seeking. The character is generally low on agreeableness. We see distrust, an emphasis on competition over cooperation. He's not straightforward and doesn't have a lot of empathy, although that develops a little bit through the course of the series. His level of neuroticism is high. He's emotionally reactive, angry, depressed, somewhat anxious, and has difficulty resisting temptation. Lawrence is a tragic figure. He had a tough time when he was young. His father was cold and distant. He gets caught up with John Kreese, and of course eventually loses that tournament. Losing was never normalized for him. He didn't understand the loss really didn't matter. His ability to win hand-to-hand combat has become a substitute for any type of true depth and sensitivity. He's caught in a superficial game. For Lawrence, reminiscing about the defeat is really an addiction. In this way, the character is actually really well written. His development stopped when he lost that tournament, so he was trapped at that age. Just like people tend to stop developing when they start using substances. If somebody started using alcohol when they were an adolescent, when they're 55, they still seem like an adolescent in many ways. So in summing up the descriptions of the two characters, in the beginning, I thought that LaRusso would be portrayed as three-dimensional and Lawrence would be two-dimensional, but as it turns out, the opposite is true. Now moving on to the analysis of the show in general. Overall, I like Cobra Kai, mostly because of the Lawrence character, but I also like the idea here that there are no clear good guys or bad guys. At the beginning, it seemed like LaRusso was going to be the good guy and Lawrence was supposed to be the bad guy, but then we get a better look into each character. As we grow to understand who they really are, the narrative becomes more complex. Initially, I really didn't like the idea of the series being based off of one part of a movie that was just okay, but as I watched the series, I realized they really did make this work. The series really became an extension of the original film and the other Karate Kid films, in part because they cast the original actors. I think contained in this series, there's an interesting philosophical debate. Cobra Kai, in a sense, is training young people for a tough life, for a competitive environment, which is implied in the three core ideals. Strike first, don't give anybody a chance to attack you, go on the offense in order to maintain a defense, everybody's out to get you, so get them first. Kind of a paranoid strategy. We see the strike hard ideal, try to overcome and destroy opponents, leaving them unable to counterattack. Here we see black and white thinking, no degrees. Don't just use the force necessary, use as much force as you can. And then we see the no mercy, implying that the Cobra Kai students should not expect mercy from their opponents, so why should they show it to their opponents? It's a cynical, dark, distrusting, and hostile view of the world, typified by simplistic thinking. Even though Lawrence finds value in his philosophy, toward the end of the series he starts to realize it doesn't actually really make sense. In a way, the series captures Lawrence's disillusionment with the philosophy that he had learned when he was young and then started to promote as an adult. Now, of course, I do have some criticisms of the series. They portray California as the Wild West, so we see all these people punching each other, kicking each other, throwing each other around. with very little police involvement compared to how much that activity is going on. The series overemphasizes the importance of technique, which is also a criticism I have of the original film, The Karate Kid. It promotes this idea that technique can compensate for athletic talent, physical size, fearless dominance, pain tolerance, and aggressiveness. Now, techniques can certainly make a difference in hand-to-hand combat, but the idea that somebody who is 90 pounds can learn these techniques over the course of a few months and defeat somebody who's 180 pounds is not really realistic. The motivation for LaRusso and Lawrence seems okay, but it's really not clear why the young people are so invested in these opposing philosophies, Cobra Kai versus Miyagi-Do. They touch on the element of bullying a bit, but we see here that these victims now become bullies themselves. The series presumes that a lot of change can occur in these people, like someone who's timid can learn martial arts and all of a sudden be highly aggressive. Cobra Kai, in a way, starts out as positive. It helps bully victims gain self-esteem and confidence. Yet somehow, it also turns a few of them into criminals, which makes the role of Miyagi-Do kind of strange. So the Miyagi-Do students subscribe to this philosophy based on balance so they can counter the Cobra Kai philosophy that has turned bully victims into a force of evil. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't really see the need for Miyagi-Do to exist at all. So, in a sense, by having Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do, we don't have balance. So there's kind of an irony in the fact that they both exist in the series. If Miyagi-Do is really just about defense, if it's always just looking out for somebody who's coming to attack and acting in a way that can preserve one's life, then a firearm would be a lot easier than all that work in the Miyagi-Do dojo. With all that physical activity, the lifting of rocks, the balancing, the working in the heat and the cold, just seems quite difficult. A firearm would be much simpler, and the training would probably take less time. Also, it would be a lot more effective. So there's just an easier route here, I think, for the participants in the series. But I realize they probably needed both Cobra Kai and Miyagi-Do to make it all work, right? To expand the rivalry between LaRusso and Lawrence. So these dojos are extensions of their own positive and negative qualities. Now, one could certainly make the argument that they're too young to possess firearms, and it would be very unlikely they would be allowed to conceal them in public, like to get a permit. So I guess in that sense, the physical attributes make sense, the ability to engage in hand-to-hand combat. But in a way, it's kind of a sad commentary on society that that would be viewed as necessary, that situations are so violent that high school students would have to worry about being physically attacked. I think that could be the case in some places, though. So in that way, I think the series does resonate at several levels. Those are my thoughts on the Cobra Kai series. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.